Hey guys, how's it going? Today, I want to do a bit of an opinion piece on exactly why I think Path of Exile 2 might just take the throne as the best ARPG ever made. If I had to choose, I'd say Diablo 2 remains the best all-round ARPG on the market despite its age, but let me know in the comments what you believe is the best. We don't have to fight about it. I generally want to know what you consider to be the best ARPG out there, and do you think Path of Exile 2 has a chance at topping it? In putting this together, I ended up running across quite a few similarities in the development of D2 and PoE2, so let me break down why I consider D2 to be the top dog, and why I think Path of Exile 2's development is on track to match it. First up, Diablo 2 released as a complete package. Nothing major changed after release, spare for the obvious expansion. There wasn't an ongoing model of service, there weren't drastic changes to the game. It was designed to be a whole, to be a 10 out of 10 day one, and remains that way today. If you played Diablo in 2000, you can expect the same general experience today. And this is both a symptom of the time, with patching not being as simple and easy as it is today, and a general change in mindset with most ARPGs now targeting that league or seasonal model. This is a trapping I feel like I've seen many good ARPGs fall into, and is one of the few concerns I have for Path of Exile 2. We've heard the early access is going to be limited in scope, with limited acts and class selection. Now, this is different given the size of Path of Exile 2. It should outlive its brief early access period, but a lackluster release can definitely set the tone for a game moving forward. I think about ARPGs like Last Epoch and Grim Dawn that released small sections over time, and I wonder if their reception would have been grander if the player base were able to experience that whole rather than piecemeal over time. I also raised this point of complete experiences, not just in relation to full release. When we look at Diablo 3 and Diablo 4, those games failed to achieve their vision day one. Both D3 and 4 struggled with major system designs that were either actively anti-player or were poorly received. Rather than being complete, they were released with the idea that, hey, if the loot isn't good enough, we can patch it after. If the players don't like the difficulty system, well, we'll tweak that too. And while you can patch a game into a solid state, once you've set your impression, it is incredibly hard to come back from that. I mean, we all remember Cyberpunk's spectacular failure at launch, and while it has become an incredible piece of work, it released a mess, and that remains a part of its perception. And when we look at perceptions and how games are viewed, Path of Exile is one with mixed reactions. It's loved or loathed for its complex systems. Many will say it's unfriendly to beginners, others will tell you to toughen up and power through to get to the goods. But a good game should help you to understand those systems over time, and void that discussion. This is something Path of Exile 2 looks to be nailing from the early footage we've seen. They appear to have clear loot and campaign designs, and increased tooltips that aren't overbearing for experienced players to help new players get a handle on it. And moving to my second point, and why I believe Diablo 2 holds the mantle, it really elevated the genre. It brought together the best concepts from other games, including its predecessor, and nailed the loop of power progression through looting to achieve greater and greater milestones. Having listened to some interviews with David Rebick, the creator of the series and previous Blizzard North president, it's clear that the development team at the time were focused on pushing the design of the genre forward. When creating the original Diablo, they had a clear vision for what they wanted to achieve. David himself talked about playing Rogue, which inspired the roguelike term, and wanting to bring that experience into Diablo and elevate it. Others on the development team also spoke about Dungeons & Dragons as an inspiration, having played with friends and wanting to bring it to PC, and cut the fat that came with setting up a campaign so they could get straight to killing skeletons. That's not far off a direct quote, they just wanted to get straight to the killing. And you might be thinking, this is an easy take to have given the game's reception. But what I'm trying to highlight here is that they had a vision for their end product based on other experiences they wanted to elevate. They didn't see other ARPGs in the market and decide to copy an existing formula. They had the goal of bringing the genre something new, something unique. And it is this mindset. This is where a lot of games today fail to hit the mark. But why is it we've seen others falling short, and why do I think PoE2 will dodge that bullet? My belief is that most ARPGs releasing in the wake of Diablo 2 were aiming for a piece of the pie. They weren't looking to reinvent the wheel, they weren't trying to create their own unique spin on the genre or elevate it. They saw success and they wanted a piece. I've used this analogy before, and I think about when PUBG took off and Fortnite after it. We suddenly saw everyone, from Fallout to Battlefield, trying their hand at a battle royale. Not because they had new ideas, but because they wanted the pie. And when those subsequent battle royales failed, we stopped seeing them developed, and we saw something similar for ARPGs. We still have the occasional new release, but we rarely got anything with real substance. And this is why 90s Blizzard used to shine, through carving their own path instead of following trends or regurgitating the same ideas. Following the original Diablo, they weren't even that keen on creating D2. They were done with it, looking for their next project. But this mindset began to change after some initial patches to the game and community feedback. They saw how much more could be done to a sequel. They once again saw potential, saw an opportunity to elevate. They saw a reason to make a sequel. Not because the first game sold well, but because there was room to grow. They were sparking new ideas from community feedback. I'd argue that's why Diablo 3 and 4 have never quite reached the same heights again. They aren't searching for improvement. They're searching for profit of established IPs, a completely different mindset, and one that only generally leads to mediocrity at best. That series has slowly devolved into a copy-paste formula, and modern-day Blizzard doesn't seem capable of understanding what made the originals so beloved. But Grinding Gear Games, I firmly believe as the development team, they see that potential. They're exploring new ideas, they're trying new things, and they're ultimately not looking to make the same experience. In saying that, it is important to note Grinding Gear Games have been pretty open about Diablo 2 being a significant inspiration, and many have called Path of Exile the spiritual successor, and it's an absolute masterpiece in its design and execution, but lacked much of that polish needed to really bring it to life, which I would argue was simply down to a lack of experience, and I say this with love. Hubris in believing they could do it better at the time as a small studio, where Diablo 2 had the benefit of an experienced team who were now on their second iteration of the series. Grinding Gear Games had sprung up with inspiration in mind and were attempting to redefine the genre, but with less practical experience and no prior experience working as a team. They've been open as a studio about this in many discussions on their approach to Path of Exile. They had many ideas in mind on how they could improve the genre. Not having gold and aspects of itemization are a small but key example. Chris Wilson identified an ExileCon ARPG roundtable hosted by Kriparian that they believed immediately that they could improve on the item drop process by completely removing gold and consumables, like potions and ammo. This is something Chris identified as a mistake, as they jumped to that assumption based off their experience, but hadn't considered the larger whole. They thought players rarely use some consumables, and forcing players to seek out ammo is simply time wasted. But these drops, while not being relevant to all players, do make up a sum of the total loot pool that players see. And by removing these, the only drops that remained were gear, and Grinding Gear Games then found players became trained to expect lots of gear, and if they didn't see it, they began to feel ripped off. You see, while gold dropping isn't a game changer for the character or the player, it does represent progression, if only slightly, and that sense of progression can keep the player motivated towards finding that big power-shifting item. Grinding Gear Games were inexperienced when they started Path of Exile, and while they were massively successful, they never quite matched the height of D2 due to some of those foundational decisions that continue to impact the series over time. The game's character rigs, for example, are known to be wildly unfriendly when creating new skills and associated animations. But this is where things began to shift, and I'll again compare it to 90s Blizzard's approach. Grinding Gear Games, when beginning to make Path of Exile 2, initially planned it as an expansion to the base game. But they began to elevate, that's our word of the day clearly. They started thinking about new additions, and as we've heard, the project continued to grow and grow and grow until it became its own game. Why is that important? Remember, after creating Diablo 1, Blizzard's team didn't want to start on D2. They'd created their ARPG and considered it done, much in the same way Grinding Gear Games finished Path of Exile and planned to continue adding content. But then, as Blizzard received community feedback about the product and patched it, they saw those missing pieces. They saw opportunity. In both situations, these companies weren't trying to capitalize on the success of their products. They were trying to improve it, something we see very little of from today's big devs. And most importantly, and especially in the case of Grinding Gear Games, they weren't afraid to look at the decisions they'd made and accept when they'd missed the mark. It's this sentiment and this ability to reflect and look back on their development of Path of Exile that is one major reason I believe Path of Exile 2 will be successful. Sure, Grinding Gear Games are out to make money. They are a business, there's no denying that. But their decision to bring Path of Exile 2 into its own game was a decision made to increase its value to the player. It continued to evolve as they continue to explore improvements. Looking at the development of Path of Exile 2, it's clear Grinding Gear Games team now have experience, something they didn't have when attempting to make Path of Exile the first time round. They have that same drive for creativity, improvement, and the vision of pushing the genre forward. And finally, and this is something that was true for D2, Path of Exile 2, and Baldur's Gate 3 as a recent example, All of these products have received massive input from the community in their development, whether it be by message boards, playtesting, or interviews. All of these developers, Grinding Gear Games, 90s Blizzard, and Larian Studios have one thing in common. They put the consumer experience at the forefront of their minds and listened when feedback was given. As a brief side note, I know Baldur's Gate 3 isn't an ARPG, but it retained a similar development style of no cut corners, significant player input, and studio focused on creation. Now, community feedback might seem like a basic label, but the way Grinding Gear Games go about seeking feedback is quite interesting. Having watched maybe every interview under the sun on Path of Exile 2, I'm frequently surprised by how often Jonathan, one of the lead devs, is asked a question that he will then sit and contemplate with the interviewer, discussing the pros and cons of their suggestion. It's a stark contrast to what you'd see in most interviews. Stock standard answers, simple yes or no's, and then attempts to hype systems that are shallower than they seem. Grinding Gear Games instead take more of a naive inquiry approach. When they're asked a complex question, they take time to consider them, and in many cases have stated that they will then take that feedback through to the team for further consideration. It's this type of commitment to making the best possible product that have led us to changes like the WASD movement system. A system that may have single-handedly delayed the initial beta launch. A system that, if not included, wouldn't have made anyone really bat an eye. It's not a common movement type in ARPGs. It isn't likely to be a game selling point, and many of the heads of the dev team have openly stated they did not expect WASD to work. They did not expect to like it. I cannot think of many developers out there who would actively spend time implementing a system that they were skeptical of. That's an awful way of spending development time. Yet, they'd heard enough feedback suggesting it may be beneficial, and instead of considering themselves the experts, they tried it, they tested it, and found it to be a game changer quite literally. We're seeing other innovations like active blocking, the now common dodge roll, and significant expansion in class and skill design to meet their new combat and loot systems. It's a development mindset that is so incredibly rare in 2024, and it is incredibly important to the success of games. Allowing those around you to innovate instead of shutting them down. And this comes from having great people like Chris Wilson, Jonathan Rogers, and others in Grinding Gear Games pushing their staff to create great games, rather than creating cash machines and chasing that live service dragon like so many other execs in the industry. I firmly believe that the incredible love for this genre, the love for their own IP, and most importantly, that willingness to go back to the drawing board and question themselves is why Path of Exile 2 is likely to take that mantle as the ultimate ARPG. Grinding Gear Games have clearly learnt from past mistakes. They're aware of the challenges players face in Path of Exile and are actively working to address those issues. They're focusing on player experiences, new and old, ensuring they keep their deep customizable systems, while also making it friendlier to newer players to avoid those same perceptions of Path of Exile 1 carrying across. I cannot wait to jump into Path of Exile 2's early access release and see if they have achieved what no dev's been able to do in close to 25 years. So tell me, do you think Path of Exile 2 is going to take that mantle, or do you think it will fall short, yet still land among the greats? Thanks for checking out this video. We're 1 month out from the early access release. We should be seeing a live stream to give us more details on the release sometime in the next fortnight, so stay tuned, and once we get some more juicy info, you'll see it here. If you want to help the channel out, throw a like on the video, sub for more, but you being here is more than enough. Have a great one, guys, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.